Hello everyone, it's Maha. Thank you once again so much for being with me here on my channel. And today, as promised, I'm gonna jump in and do the rest of the questions for my Q&A video. So continuation of the previous video. And I'm really excited. It's gonna be a long video, everybody, because just purely due to the nature of the questions that I've been asked, it's going to be one of my longest, probably, videos that I have done, besides the Tarot and Astrology series, of course. So, without further ado, I'm just going to jump right in and get started. So grab a cup of tea or coffee, and I hope you enjoy the video. So the first question is from Mina Rose. Hi, Mina. She says, please talk about Iran. I was born in 1971 and we moved to LA in 1978, and I always wanted to write a book about what that was like for my family. My dad went from being a pilot to working at a gas station, and my mom was a college professor and she had to be a maid. It was hard times. Yes, isn't that the story of so many of us immigrants, no matter where we come from, really, immigrants and refugees to other countries. But this is a typical story of Iranian families who come from highly educated careers, professions, and they have to start from zero, and they usually end up in jobs that are way below their education and their level. For example, I know so many, I can just think in 2 seconds, I can bring to mind at least 20 different people I know through family, relatives, friends of friends, parents of friends who have been, and who've had fathers who were engineers or doctors, dentists, scientists, and then they ended up coming to Canada and driving a cab or delivering pizza. Basically, this is just it's very unfortunate. It's very sad because I know for me, for my father, it was very hard on his self-esteem. He was working for the Iranian national oil company as a chemical engineer, and when we came to Canada, he couldn't obviously find a job in his field, and even though he was educated in an American university in Iran by English, British, and American professors, he still couldn't get any jobs here, and he was unemployed for 4 years, trying different things. Like, he tried to get into accounting, he tried his foot in so many different professions, and finally he ended up getting a job at a hotel doing maintenance engineering, which is way below his level, of course. But you know, you have to kind of leave your pride, leave everything you've done and worked for all your life in your country back home, and just accept that you're gonna have a different life and you're here for different reasons. Mostly, for most Iranian families, it was security, and it was starting a new life in a country that was promising opportunity. So yeah, I understand, very hard times. These are really difficult things to talk about for me also. And you know what, Mina, I'm also writing a book. I think I talked about it on my channel before. I am writing a book. I have been writing a book for the past, I don't know, something like 5 years or 4 years. Writing a book is freaking hard. It's so much work. Well, I guess it depends what kind of book you want to write, but the kind of book that I'm writing is basically the story of my life, and it's since childhood, all my experiences, and it's just taking forever. But I think I do have a story to tell. I don't call myself a writer. I don't really identify as a writer, even though I love writing. I do have a story to tell, and I feel that it's my duty to tell it and my purpose to tell it. So I think if you want to write a book, Mina, go ahead and do it. I mean, we need more books of people talking about Iran and their experiences in Iran. And I'm finding, and especially the people I meet, and even on this channel, all of you are interested in my Persian, my Iranian background. And I think right now, at this time, there is a huge interest to know that part of the world, especially because that part of the world is so oppressed. The government is so strict and closed and not wanting to open up its doors to other countries, to educate people about its country and its people. So I think it's really nice that now, with this generation of people from our generation, I was born in 1976, by the way, and we moved to Canada in 1987. I'm going to talk about that because now these questions that I'm answering right now, they all kind of overlap. So I will at some point stop and then read the next question, but just keep in mind I'm not skipping your question. I know that in the end it'll all kind of work itself out and I will answer everything. So yeah, so I moved, we came here in 1987, and for us it was different. If you moved here in 1978, that was before the revolution, the Iranian revolution, for those of you who don't know, took place in 1979. And after that, there was a war about a year later, if I'm not mistaken, the Iran-Iraq war, so the Persian Gulf, the Gulf War. And that was a big war that lasted 9 years. So I lived pretty much all my childhood, from the age of 3 onwards, in a country at war. When we moved here, I was 10 and a half, and I finished up until grade 5, my elementary school. I finished grade 5, and then we moved out of Iran. So now I'm going to stop and read another question because I know that it's going to overlap. And the next question is from Book Wait. Hi, I feel like I know you. I haven't seen you before and I don't know your name, but I love your comments. Thank you. I love that, everybody. I love how there's certain people that I only see their icon, little icon. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they sound like, what their name is, or anything about them, but I still feel a connection. Isn't that amazing? It's just, I don't know what that is, right? It's just the energy. Anyway, so she asks me, I'm wondering about your transition to Canada, how old you were, and if you already spoke English or not, and how much of a cultural shock it was for you. No, I didn't speak a word of English. I spoke 3 words, yes, no, and okay. That's all I knew. And I think I also knew come, not come here, but I would just point, come. But yeah, I spoke no English. It was a culture shock for all of us, my entire family. My family and I, like I said, I was in Iran until I was 10 and a half, so I finished grade 5, and we moved because of the war. We basically escaped. We escaped Iran. We escaped the country because my brother was, at the time, he was 15 and he was being drafted to war. Believe it or not, the age for going to war at the time was 16. And kids were being drafted to go to war, and they obviously would die. And this crazy system brainwashed people into thinking that when they go to war and they die, they're doing service for their country, and it's like they're martyrs. They're doing a good deed, so they'll go to heaven. You know, they have like a place in heaven when they die. That's how they reassured parents not to be grieving too much for their children. Anyway, screwed up system. This is all going in my book. So yeah, we left 10 and a half. When I was 10 and a half, we left Iran, went to Turkey, and stayed there for 9.5 months. That was actually pretty much the route for like the escape plan for most Persians at the time, because it was pretty much the borders were closed. You couldn't get out, so we had to escape. We didn't escape by foot, but we had this complicated route, which I'm not going to get into. That's all, it's kind of personal, I guess, but I'm writing a book about it. So we escaped Turkey, we escaped Iran, went to Turkey. We were there for 9.5 months before we could enter Canada, before Canada basically allowed us to accepted us to come in. And yes, it was a huge culture shock arriving to Canada. We came straight to Vancouver, BC, where I live still today. But of course, like I've said on my channel before, I've moved and lived in different countries before, in Europe and also South America. But I'm back in Vancouver for the moment, just for now. I feel like the city has always kind of been transitory for me, and it is kind of like that for a lot of people living here, younger people. It is kind of in between city. So anyway, it was really hard to transition. Oh, it was so tremendously hard. I mean, the first 2 years was the worst 2 years of my life. And I went straight, I finished grade 5, and when I came to Canada, we couldn't go to school right away because we didn't have the paperwork, I guess, all done. So we went to school about a year later, by the time everything was ready for us. And I went to ESL for 6 months. I don't know the timeline, but it was before I went to high school. So what happened was from grade 5, finishing grade 5 in Iran, ESL in elementary school here for 6 months, and then straight to high school. So I skipped grade 7, 6 and 7. I skipped grade 6 and 7. I never had 6 and 7 education. So I went straight to grade 8, and that was so hard for me. Not in terms of the education. I was actually really ahead of the school system in every class except the ones that required me to speak English. So for example, my mathematics was the best. It was the easiest for me because in Iran we have a very hard education system for kids. It's just the way it is. It's the way it's been. It's really tough. And so I learned that what the grade 8s were learning in math, I already learned in grade 5. So we were so much ahead in Iran that way in terms of science and math. And so that was so easy for me. It was just like a piece of cake. But what was hard was English, because I didn't speak English. But at the time, there was no ESL in my high school. This was back in 1989. Yeah, there was no ESL, English as a second language. So I had to go straight to regular classes with the regular kids and study with them. And that was really hard because there was a lot of bullying. The school that I went to was a very white school. I was the only Middle Easterner. There were no blacks, no Hispanic. Really, there was white and Greek, because it was a Greek area of Vancouver, so there was some Greeks there, but mostly white, just Canadian white, great-grandparents white. When I say white, I mean no ethnical background, speaking English perfectly. So for me, that was very hard, first of all, to blend in with the kids. No way. The way I look and the language I didn't speak, speaking really bad English and looking so different, totally sticking out like anything you can imagine possible would stick out, like the most possible way, in every way. So I was obviously bullied a lot. I was made fun of for my name, even, everything about me. Skin color, hair color, just being different, So I really suffered that year. It was really hard. I had anxiety every single night. I think that part of the reason why I struggle with anxiety now has a lot to do with what I went through those times, those changes, and having no emotional support. The way I grew up in my family, there was nobody to talk to. I didn't have an older sibling. I couldn't talk to my parents about all the things that I was dealing with because I thought they have their own issues. I respected that. And so I kept a lot of things to myself, and I felt really bad for who I was, for how I looked. I hated the way I looked. I thought I was ugly. I just wanted nothing to do with dark hair and dark eyes and dark skin. And yeah, it was really, really hard times that way, not only learning English, but the kids being so not nice. Not friendly, not open, not understanding, not wanting to help. And I come from a culture, I don't know if you know any Persians in your life, but from my culture, one of the things that sticks out to me in my culture is kindness. Persian people generally are very kind people. They're very friendly. I mean, unfortunately, the government is screwed up, so nobody can visit that country. But the people I know that I've met in my life, the few people that I've met who have been to Iran, they love it only because of the kindness and the generosity of the people, and how much they love outsiders and foreigners, and they love difference. And that's what I imagined when I came here. I was thinking that people would love me because I'm different, but it was completely the opposite. So I guess that was a cultural shock, in some ways. I can talk about cultural shock for hours and hours. Look, I have a whole chapter just on my high school experience in my book. So yeah, I mean, I can't really, I feel like it's hard for me to sum it all up in a nutshell, but many things are different here in the West, in North America. Just the way people are, the way people talk to each other, strangers, how they relate to each other, families, how they relate to each other. Things are different, very different. And I found that very difficult. And there are so many examples I can give. But, in school, finally, when I did find some friends, I found it really hard to connect with them because of the difference. It took a while. I would say at least a few years, probably a good 5 years to get used to that. But the funny thing is that I want to say this, when I went back to Iran to visit for the first time in 14 years, so I didn't visit for 14 years. I went back after 14 years of being in Canada. And so by that time, as you can imagine, I was used to being Canadian after 14 years of living here. And when I went there, it was so funny because I experienced cultural shock over there. So it was like reverse cultural shock. I was the outsider there. I was looking as the outsider from inside Iran, and I was looking at things like, wow, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to cross the street? There's so many people, like, just so many things were shocking, big, huge shock. But when we came here, it was like the opposite. I remember when we first came here, our initial reaction, very initial, just, before I went to school and before I really made friends and all that was wow, there are no people on the street. Where are all the people? Oh my gosh, it's so quiet. We can just cross the street and we don't even have to look because the cars are stopping for us. They're letting us go. They're not running us over. They're not like heartless like the cars, the driving, the crazy driving in Iran, especially Tehran, which is where I lived. I wasn't born in Tehran. I was born in the south. I was born in Abadan, which is the right where the site of the war was, Persian Gulf. Abadan is the south point of Iran. And I was born there, and I was there until I was 3. So before the war began, I was there. And then we moved to Shiraz, where my dad is from. The Shiraz wine. Have you heard of the Shiraz wine? Of course you have, if you're a red wine drinker. That's where the grapes come from. Shiraz is known as the city of wine and poetry. So anyway, I was there for about a year living with my grandparents, and my mom had to go to war because she was a nurse. And yeah, I didn't talk about my mom when I talked about my dad and how hard it was for him to find work here. For my mom, it was also hard for different reasons. But she was a nurse and she had to go to war. She was, it was part of her duty to be at war, giving service to the country while the country was at war. So I had to be kind of most of the time with my dad and my grandparents, and my mom would come and go and visit. Long story how she got out of that, but finally we moved to Tehran, which is the capital, and that's where I grew up. That's where I went to school. That's where I did my elementary schooling, and so that's where I went to visit my parents' relatives, my aunts, my mom's sister, and her brothers live there. My grandma passed away, my mom's mom, a year after we came here, but I went back. When I went back, I stayed with my aunt, and I also visited Shiraz, my dad's heritage, which is my favorite city in Iran. If you ever go, or if you see any photos of Shiraz, it's so beautiful. But in Tehran, it's a busy, bustling city. Totally polluted now. Didn't used to be 20 years ago, but now it's very polluted and very jam-packed with traffic. So just even crossing the street for me was like I had to take a course on how to cross the street. I don't think I ever did cross the street by myself. I was too afraid. I was always with my cousin, like holding her hand, take me across the street. And yeah, it's pretty crazy there. So the cultural shock was not only with the people that I met here when I first came, but also with how the city looks, you know, how things are just so different. Architecture, people walking, you know, the way people interact with each other, all of that, everything. Not just the more intimate things that you learn when you get close to people, but also just on the surface. There's a lot of difference. So the next question is from Rebecca Wrights. She says, for the Q&A, which part of Iran are you from? And I've already answered that. My family are from Tabriz and some in Tehran. Tabriz is beautiful. They have really beautiful Persian carpets there. That's what they're known for. I'm half Persian on my dad's side. I live in England and I visited Iran a few times and grew up celebrating Nowruz, etc. Nowruz is the Persian New Year. By the way, for everybody, I've made a video in my channel. It's in the cultural playlist if you look it up. But I'd like to connect with my Persian heritage more. Have you worked with any Persian deities? If so, I'd love to hear your experiences. I'm very drawn to Anahita. She's like the Persian Inanna / Aphrodite. I actually haven't worked with any Persian deities. I don't know, for me, there's something not right. It doesn't feel right for me to work with the Persian pantheon. It feels like too close to home or something. I've always been someone who's been really interested in the other cultures. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I'm Sagittarius, I don't know. But I mean, I've always also had a strong connection with the Greek pantheon. I know that obviously throughout history, the Greeks and the Persians were very connected. You know, they were at war and peace and, you know, back and forth. The Greeks wrote a lot about the Persians, were part of their mythology in some ways. Perseus means the Persian, he's a Greek god. And I just never really felt called. By the way, speaking of the Greeks and Persians, the Alexander the Great, he married a Persian princess. So we've had a lot of similarities, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I connect so strongly to the Greek pantheon. But with the Persian, I don't know, it just always felt like it's too close to me. It's funny because even when it comes to partners in my life, romantic partners, I've always been more attracted to people from other cultures. So I think that's just a personal thing. But I actually am very interested in Persian mythology. I've studied it a little bit, but you know, it's really, really hard. At least I found it very difficult to find any information about Persian mythology in English. There are some books in Persian that I found that are really good. I got them from Iran. But it's always a little bit hard. I can read in Farsi, read and write, but my level of Farsi, of course, is it's not that great because I was, like I said, I was just 10 and a half when I left there. And although I can read and write, I'm not very strong at it. I'd rather read in English. And I have not really found much published about Persian mythology and even just Persia. And I remember about 20 years ago, like when I was searching a lot, when I was really interested in finding out about Persian mythologies and my own background, I went to many libraries, and finally I went to the biggest library here in Vancouver. And I reached out to the librarian, the main librarian, and she told me something interesting. She said that since the Iranian Revolution, 1979, the relationship between America and Iran hasn't been great, obviously, as we all know. And so, because we get most of our books from America, we haven't really had much coming about Iran, about Persia, in English. So, yeah, maybe that's the reason. Perhaps it's political reasons. Unfortunately, with our current government in Iran, like I said, it's very oppressive. It's very closed, not really open to teaching others about our culture, opening up to teaching them, you know. So I feel like it's part of my job, and some of us Persian people from, you know, the ones who escaped Iran and grew up here felt that it is part of their purpose to talk about their culture. And I feel that it is it's a passion of mine to share my culture with others, like I'm doing in this video. And I'm very grateful that you, my audience, are interested, and you have approached me to have asked me questions about it. So Anahita is a goddess of the waters. By the way, this is the only deck I have found where Anahita is featured. No other decks but this one, Animal Divine. I think it's Animal Divine by Lisa Hunt. And this is Anahita. This is depiction of Anahita. That's actually the main reason why I bought this deck. She's depicted as the Page of Swords. I wouldn't personally attribute Anahita to the Page of Swords. I would probably think more about Queen of Cups. But in this book, Lisa Hunt says that she's also the goddess of air and water. There is a really great book, Rebecca, and for those of you who are interested, on Anahita. I don't know if you've heard of this book yet. I will put the description down below in the description box. It's written by Payam Nabraz. He's one of the best, or pretty much one of the rare people out there who is a scholar on Persian mythologies. He is, I believe, also a member of the Golden Dawn and a member of the Druids, or the Order of Druids. And he's written a book on Anahita. So I would suggest that book for you. That's a very great place to start. For me, it always felt, I thought about working with Anahita, but it always felt too close, like I said, and I know people named Anahita. In my cousin's name, one of my cousins, her name is Anahita. I had a best friend when I was younger named Anahita, so it just felt a bit strange working with her as a goddess or as an archetype, as a deity, you know. But you know, you never know. Maybe things will change. However, I do feel a strong call to work, and I have in the past worked with Inanna and the Sumerian pantheon, which is still closely linked, right? A lot of similarities. The Babylonian tarot is a great one for working with that pantheon, which I want to talk about in another video. And I have shared it on my channel, by the way, if you want to look for it. So Payam Nabraz is a great source. He's done some books on Persian mythology and celebrations, Persian celebrations. And one of the things I loved, and actually this is the reason when I first started my channel, one of the things I love to do is to share Persian celebrations with all of you, because I started noticing the similarities between the ancient Zoroastrian Persian traditions, like celebrating autumn equinox and solstices, was so similar to the northern celebrations, northern European celebrations. So I'm still, you know, I'm still on this path of learning and researching and growing through it with my own practice. So yes, I hope that answered your question, and thank you for the question. It's amazing to share. Thank you for sharing some of yourself with us as well. So the next question is from Space Between the Notes. Hello. I'm going to answer your question in a separate video. He asks me, would love to hear you, speak about growing up in Iran. I am. And how does astrology affect the way you read the cards? I want to make a separate video for this because before you asked me this question, I actually wanted to make a video just about this topic. So I want to give it its own video. So please be patient for that one. It'll come up probably after I release this video. So the next question is from Susie Dreams, and I answered a part of your question in the previous video about my art. So she says, I'm also interested in your Iranian background and your family's reasons for leaving, as long as you're comfortable to speak of it. I think I did a little bit in the beginning. I believe you have said you are or were Zoroastrian. How do your family take you using tarot, astrology, etc.? Okay. So no, like I said, I'm very interested in talking about the Persian celebrations, the Zoroastrian celebrations, but I'm not Zoroastrian. I was born into the religion of Islam, which is the religion of the majority of the Iranian people. Zoroastrianism is the Persian religion, the original Persian religion, which was practiced before Muslims from the Arab world came and conquered Iran and basically forced people to convert to Islam. There are still Zoroastrians in Iran and outside of Iran, but at the time, in the beginning of the Islamic Republic, they were being prosecuted. And even before, during the time when the Arabs conquered over Iran, ruled over Iran over Persia for 800 years, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, something like quite a number of years. And at the time when they were ruling Persia, Persian people were not allowed to practice their original Persian religion, Zoroastrianism, and they were also not allowed to speak Persian or write in Farsi or write in Persian. So this is why many books were published in Arabic by Persian scientists and Persian astrologers and scientists. A lot of times when I read about them in English books, they refer to them as Arabs. But this is always something I like to stop and, interject and correct people, because they were Persian. And the reason why they wrote in Arabic is because they weren't allowed. It was illegal, basically, to write and publish works in their native language. So, I always say, I think the Persians are a very strong group of people, because they kept their values and parts of their religion, the traditions, alive, even though they were forced into to letting go of them. For example, the Persian New Year, for all Persians, regardless of religion, is the Nowruz on spring equinox, and that is an ancient Zoroastrian tradition that's been kept. But people had to fight for that. They had to fight to celebrate. They were being killed for basically keeping their own rituals, and they just did it. They didn't stop. They persisted. They're very persistent people. A lot of times people ask me things like, how come you have this tyrant prime minister? Like, why did you vote for him? And I always say, people in Iran, they're trying really hard to just make little changes in their everyday lives, because the government over there is so oppressive. They don't allow them to do very simple things. And they're very brave, because they go out onto the streets and they protest and they get killed in numbers, thousands, just for simple things, just for having simple rights. So they're constantly fighting. It's not that they're not fighting. It's just that we don't see it when we're sitting from far away, in the outside countries, in the outside world. We don't really see how much they're fighting, how much they're going against the system, all the things they're doing. And there's been a lot of changes right now. The way Iran is right now is very different from how it was 25 years ago when I left with my family. Okay, so now I get sidetracked and I get into this whole thing because I just love talking about this, and I can talk about this topic for hours and hours, as you can probably tell, but I don't want to disrespect your questions. So she also said, how does your family take you using tarot, astrology? Yeah, so this is interesting because, I never really understood why Christianity was against tarot and astrology, because I always thought that Islam is connected to Christianity, and it is, because in Islam we do consider Jesus as a prophet and Moses as a prophet. I mean, I say we, but I'm not a practicing Muslim. I don't practice, and I want to talk about that in the next question, actually, that Lavender Moon asks me. I'll talk about that, but so I mean, I'm born into Islam, because my parents were born into Islam, and we were for many generations. So down the line, I'm not Zoroastrian, even though we do keep our traditions regardless of religion. But so yeah, I always was confused why Christianity is against. I mean, I don't know if Christianity is against tarot, but there's a lot of talk about Christian religion seeing tarot as demonic or seeing divination as demonic. But in Iran, even today, being a very fundamentalist Islamic country, it's totally okay to practice tarot. It's totally fine to learn about astrology. In fact, tarot is huge in Iran. Crystal healing, plant, herbs, all of the stuff that we consider as the umbrella that falls underneath witchcraft, all of this is ancient wisdom that is still active in that part of the world, in Iran. And, you know, it's actually pretty typical to find the evil eye. I have a talisman right there. The evil eye in people's homes. People put that. It's not seen as a you know, demonic to practice tarot. It's there's all kinds of tarot businesses. Turkish coffee reading. I don't know if you are any of you familiar with Turkish coffee reading. There's tea leaf reading. All of that. It's totally okay. So yeah, to answer your question, my family is, my dad is a huge skeptic of so many things, but when I told him I wanted to study astrology, the first thing he said to me was, well, you know, the Egyptians studied astrology, so there must be some truth to it. You know, there must be something in it. And yeah, so and even in Iran, people are really excited these days about these sorts of divination tools. Astrology is not always used as divination, but it can be. So it's interesting. Interesting question. Thank you. So this brings me to the next question, which is from Amber from Lavender Moon. Hi. Her question has two parts. The first one says, what first attracted you to astrology, and how did you first begin to learn it? So I'm not going to answer this question in this video. I am going to post a link in the description box, which is going to link you to the video I made a while ago, sort of updating on my astrology journey, where I'm going with it, and how I first began to get an exposure to astrology, and how I learned and why I learned. So if you would like, you can just watch that video down below. And the next question she asks me is, what religion did you grow up with, and how has your spirituality changed or evolved? Wow, big question, and a really good one. I could obviously, as I keep over and over saying this, I could do a whole video on this one too. Well, like I said, I was born into the religion of Islam. I'm not a practicing Muslim, so I was born into it, but I'm not practicing it, and I haven't for many, many years. Basically, the only time I practiced it was when I was a kid in Iran. In Islam, the age of maturity for women is 9. So when I was living there, because of the strict sort of education system and brainwashing that took place at the time, this was post-revolution, when the Islamic Republic just basically came to power, and the school system was really, really harsh. And as far as mentally brainwashing children, it was really bad. So I went to a school where my teachers were constantly, you know, instilling fear into our little brains. And so I became a practicing Muslim, not because my parents made me do it. My parents were actually both very open-minded. My dad was pretty much an atheist most of his life, so that's him. And then my mom, she was religious, not most of her life, for a very short period in her life. And it was mostly because she grew up in a family that was religious, not fundamentalist religious, just, you know, my grandma and my aunt, they just practiced for their own selves, never really pushing it on anybody, and never forcing anybody at all to go with their ways. Never even really discussing their religion, just, you know, quietly just practicing their own solitary belief, practice. And my mom, for a while, she was praying, but she was never really strict with like covering her hair and all of that. She just kind of, she always brought me up with, she always told me, you know, because I used to ask her a lot of questions, because at school they were always scaring us, you know, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. If you do this, you're going to go to hell, you know, burn in hell. And so I was always asking her questions, and I remember she always said to me, you know, as long as you're a good person, it doesn't matter whether you cover your hair or not. As long as you do good. She always taught me those things, both my parents, and they were always very open-minded. So the only reason I was, at that time, between 9 to 10 and a half, so just before we left Iran, I was practicing, like praying and doing all the rituals and stuff, was because of school. Because in school, they basically made us so afraid of God and hell, you know, and so many visual stories I have, visual images I have of the stories they told us that really scared me. And I didn't want to be a bad person, you know. I was a sensitive child, and I wanted to be good, so I believed that this is what I have to do. And then when I stopped practicing it. I stopped doing all those rituals and stuff when we left Iran. But I still, for many years, felt guilty for not praying, for not doing the things I was supposed to do. And if I did the things I wasn't supposed to do, I would have this sense of shame that I would carry around with me. You know, I was always feeling this cloud of darkness over me, like with guilt and shame. And it took many years to rid myself, my consciousness, off of that, to clear myself off of that. It took many years and lots of work, really. And I guess from my own studies and my own travels and talking to different people, getting to know different religions, I felt that I had to find my own truth. And the way that I finally, because for a time, I should say, maybe when I was in my early 20s, I started to really go against Islam. It was almost like I was hating everything to do with Islam, you know, like opposite end. And then I guess that was part of the process of coming to terms with the past training and kind of letting go of the negative aspects of it, and then accepting the positive, more spiritual aspects of it. And what helped me a lot was getting to know the works of Sufi masters like Rumi and Hafez, and learning that essentially their teachings were of love, you know, not hate, not fear. And they were very devout Muslims. Sufism is a branch of Islam. It's the mystical branch of Islam, practiced in Iran and outside. And so I got to know their work, and, you know, I made friends with the religion, accepted what I was being taught was the fundamentalist side of that. So I have nothing against Islam. I just don't practice it. My practice now has evolved to where, from all my own understanding and knowledge and experience, I've developed my own personal practice, and it's more of a spiritual rather than, I would say, religious practice. Even though I do rituals, they are more to do with my own personal imagination, my own, you know. I was reading a book by Thomas More a couple of years ago, and he talked about the path of the intuition being a religious path, you know, creating your own path. And I guess the accumulation of getting to know the work of Sufi masters, and also Taoism. Taoism has been a huge part of my philosophy of life, really. And the work of Lao Tse, the Taoist prophet, has really affected my own work, my work of art, what I do in my art, and my spiritual practice. And then about 6.5 years ago, I started really getting interested in witchcraft and paganism and earth spirituality, and that really resonated with me. Just because I've always felt such a close, deep spiritual connection with nature, and I've talked about that a little bit when I talked about my artwork. So, and then the goddess form in itself and how what that means to me, I kind of also talked about. So yeah, that's how it's kind of, in a nutshell, has evolved. And I'm gonna now read the next question, which is kind of related to this. So that's why I'm reading it now, because I know that they are similar, and maybe I've already answered some of them just now, and I might be repeating myself, you know, in this video, you guys, so just keep that in mind. Sometimes I just keep talking and I might be repeating myself. So the next question is from Cosmic Arcana, Jules from Cosmic Arcana, and she asks, "Hi Maha." Hi Jules. "My question is regarding your cultural background and its influence on your spiritual path and practice. Do you take any guidance from the words of Rumi, and if so, has this influenced your approach to your path? My other question is, do you combine other cultural influences with your ancestral influence to your spiritual path?" So, I don't know, I think I kind of answered all of that in all the other questions, I think. Really great questions. Thank you for your interest in my spirituality, everybody, and you, Jules. So yes, of course, Rumi is one of my greatest teachers in life. I try to read him daily. I don't always, but I used to for a while. And also Hafez. Hafez is in the Western world not as popular as Rumi, and he also writes just about love, a lot about love. I've done a video on him, also a Sufi master, really beautiful work. So those two, Hafez and Rumi. Hafez I like to read when I'm feeling down. He just has a way of bringing me up, and Rumi is just very deep, and yeah, I wish I could memorize his poems. You know, in Iran, many people from the older generations, they memorize these poems, these sayings of Rumi and Hafez. And so in everyday life, when they're talking, they'll just throw a little verse here and there. It's quite beautiful. My great uncle, when I was visiting Iran, he did that a lot. You know, he would be walking and talking. He would just be, you know, reciting Rumi and Hafez, and it was so cool, because I just love that kind of old world, ancient wisdom in everyday life. So yeah, I do consider him one of my biggest teachers. And do I combine other cultural influences with my ancestral influence? Cheeky's being loud. He's a little bird, but he can be really loud. I hope I don't have to go and get him. He's getting a bit impatient because it's starting to get dark. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting really tired. I hope you're not tired. I hope you're not tired of listening to me. But yeah, it's something I guess I have done, and I like to do, because I'm always interested in other cultures, period, just in general. So not just in their deities and their ways of thinking and their philosophies and their spiritual practices. In all of that, I've always really been drawn to learning and finding the connections, you know, cross-cultural connections between spirituality and for example, just looking at gods and goddesses that are very, very, very similar in different cultures. That's actually one of my passions, to just read about the same goddess and how it's manifested in different cultures, or same god, and how it's changed, and what kind of forms it's taken in different cultures. That I find really interesting. And I think I mentioned that I really feel a close connection to the Greek pantheon. And so I have, in my bedroom, I have posters of the Greek goddesses that I really, really feel close connection to. And also some Sumerian, older, not Egyptian. for some reason, Egyptian mythology and just the whole lore, Egyptian magic and all of that has never really called to me. And I don't know if that's because in the culture where I come from, I feel, again, too closely linked to the Egyptian culture. I don't know. So yeah, thank you so much for your question. That was wonderful to answer, and I hope I did answer it. And so the next question, I'm gonna do it right after I get a glass of water, and I hope it doesn't get too dark because I think it's starting to cloud over. So suddenly it got super dark. It's autumn now, and 10 minutes makes a huge difference. It clouded over and suddenly it got so dark. So I apologize about that, but I can't turn that light on behind me because then you won't be able to see me. It creates a shadow and I don't have a light facing me. So this is the best I can do, but we're almost finished. This is the last question, and it's from Natural Explorer. The question is a longer one with many different little parts. So I'm gonna do my best to answer it as best I can. She says, what I find fascinating about you and your channel is your Persian background and how this relates in with the ancient Aryan / Parthian / Persian practices of the divination arts. I have grown very interested in the Aryan background of modern day Iran and how closely this relates with other ancient Aryan-based civilizations in the West, like Ireland and those from the North. Yes, I'm just gonna stop and answer this part of it. It's not really a question yet, but yes, you're definitely right. There are links between the Persians of the ancient Aryan people and Ireland. In fact, I met a man once in a library and he told me something really interesting. He said that there's some islands in Ireland called Aran Islands, and they were discovered by Aryan explorers coming from Persia, and they named them Aryan Islands, and now they're Aran Islands. I don't know anything about that more than what I just told you, but I thought that's so interesting. I always found these links, like I was saying before, between Persian traditional celebrations and even the way they are, what they're called, their names. Like we call Yule Yalda, we call Mabon Mehragan. There's a lot of similarities with the stories of these traditions as well. So I'm also really fascinated about this topic, and I haven't researched it a whole lot just because I haven't found a lot of information. But like I said, Payam Nabraz, the author and scholar that I named earlier, he has written a really good book about how these traditional Persian practices link to the northern Western practices as well. So you might want to look into him. He's great. He's a great resource. I just wanted to say here that the Aryan race of the Persian people is not to be confused with the Aryan race that Hitler thought to be superior, the superior race. From what I have researched and from the books that I have, these two are not to be confused. And I'm not going to talk so much about that because that's a long topic, and it's also not one that I'm really comfortable getting into. From my own research, these two are not really related. And the Aryan people, Iran translates to the land of the Aryans. The Aryans were the ancient people of Persia. Persia is the old name for Iran, the Persian Empire, and the name was changed, I think about 60 years ago. I'm not exactly sure on how many years, 60, 70, to Iran. So it was renamed from Persia to Iran. So I'll continue reading from your question. In general, could you create some videos on how you see the esoteric arts of the Persian culture have evolved? How is tarot, astrology, numerology, and Kabbalah integrated into the Persian tradition? Do you think the ancient magi referred in the Bible are from the Persian heritage? Maybe the Sufis have a lot of the Persian esoteric practices in their traditions? Not sure. What do you think? Okay. So yeah, that was a lot. Thank you. These are really great questions, and I do have to make separate videos for the main question that you're asking me, which is to elaborate and give some ideas about the esoteric arts of Persian culture. And I would love to do this. Is one of my favorite topics. It's a passion of mine. So I will definitely do that in the future. Thank you for requesting it. And what can I say? The magi that you're referring to, well, the word magic comes from the Persian word magus. And one of the three magi was Zoroaster. So Zoroaster was the Persian prophet and the astrologer who predicted Jesus' birth, saying that he was born under the constellation of Virgo. Now, this is from my research. I'm going to link a video down below. You may be interested in watching that, where I think it's Bill Donahue. He is into Gnostic Christianity, and he will elaborate on this whole Zoroastrianism and how that relates to Christianity, and he will talk about the three magi in there. That's a very interesting video. I will link it down below. Sufism is the esoteric, is the mystical branch of Islam, and that is it's not really related to the tradition, the esoteric practices of the Persians, which the Persians were more ancient than Islam. Islam is, I don't know, 1,400 approximately years ago, and the ancient practices of Persian culture go back 7,000 years. So before pre-Christianity, pre-Judaism, pre-Abrahamic religions. And so they're not necessarily connected, but nowadays they are becoming more integrated, because, as I said, Persian people have kept their culture throughout the years. They have managed, through struggling, through fighting for their own culture, have managed to keep their cultures and keep their traditions and keep practicing them in a very oppressive, fundamentalist country. So Sufism, it used to be a lot harder to get away with the more mystical branch of Islam in Iran, but nowadays things have changed a lot. So many people are able to embrace their past of being converted to Islam through acquainting themselves with the Sufi practices or the Sufi wisdom. So I think that's it. So I hope that I could somehow answer some of these questions. Like I said, I will keep them, and I will hopefully make more in-depth videos in the future talking about Persian practices and the esoteric traditions. This is one of my biggest research areas, really. But it is, like I said, hard to find information on it as well. I have a very good friend who is a Zoroaster. She's a Zoroastrian, and she is older than me, and she has written some books in Persian and Farsi about this topic. So I am planning on getting together with her and just really picking her brain and trying to get information so I can put it all together and process it myself first, and then kind of present them to you guys. So thank you for your interest. Thank you everybody for your interest in taking the time to write to me and to be interested about me and my culture. I really enjoyed this process of making this video, but I gotta say it was hard for me because I don't think I've ever talked about myself for so long. So I am kind of exhausted right now, and I think the lighting kind of fits the mood. So I'm gonna end the video right here, and thank you all for being with me. Thank you so much. I'm sending you, as always, lots of love and many blessings, and hope to see you in the next video. Blessings. Bye, everyone.